Have you ever witnessed a single moment so charged with cruelty that it changed the course of countless lives in an instant? Picture a dusty roadside in a small American town. An elderly black veteran, his back stooped with age, his skin etched with decades of sacrifice, stands quietly waiting for his morning bus. A biker roars up on a rumbling Harley and without warning shoves the old man to the ground. It seems like an unforgivable act of disrespect, but wait until you see the floodgates of retribution that open soon after. Because in just 1 hour, special forces would arrive and karma would come swift and hard. In the sleepy outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina, a stone's throw from the bustling gates of Fort Bragg, lived Samuel Jefferson, an 85-year-old black veteran. He was a humble man with a proud heart. His faded medals from the Korean War and Vietnam War told silent stories of bravery that only he truly knew. Samuel had been stationed at Fort Bragg decades ago when he was in his physical prime and part of a regiment that specialized in covert infiltration skills that were considered advanced for their time. He never boasted about those days, though. His stoic manner and clear-eyed gaze revealed a man who had known conflict intimately, but chose to walk in peace. Samuel stood about 5 feet 9 inches tall in his youth, though he'd shrunk an inch or two with the passing years. His strong jaw and bright, inquisitive eyes contradicted the wrinkles lining his face. Even his grandchildren teased him, sometimes saying he looked too tough to be 85. He'd walk 2 miles every morning to reach the same bus stop, then head into town to volunteer at a local veterans clinic. The real name of that clinic was Womack Army Medical Center, and his daily devotion was to speak to younger veterans struggling with the aftermath of combat. He'd give them reassurance, help them fill out forms, and sit in quiet comfort with them when nightmares took hold. He believed nobody should face those shadows alone. It was this unwavering dedication that had Samuel standing outside that morning, waiting for bus number 17. The sun was just high enough to warm the asphalt, and the thick summer humidity was already clinging to his clothes. He was wearing his old army cap, faded olive drab fabric, with a single patch that read, "Airborne." That cap was as much a part of him as the family photos in his wallet. He whistled a little tune, thinking about the old days, about the soldiers he'd known, who never made it home, and about the simple gratitude he felt for being alive. Little did he know that morning would become the single, most tumultuous day of his life, a day that would test not only his faith in humanity, but also the allegiance of old brothers-in-arms he once counted on. And all of it would begin with a roar of an engine, the screech of tires, and a hateful shove in broad daylight. Trevor Reed, known to his biker buddies as Venom, was a tall, lanky man in his late 20s, his arms covered in tattoos. Some were typical biker insignias, skulls, flaming wheels, and cryptic symbols, but nestled among them were a few Nazi-related emblems he'd picked up during his misguided teenage years. Trevor wasn't a devout follower of any real ideology. Mostly, he was a disillusioned soul looking for a reason to be angry. If you dug deep enough, you'd find a wounded child within, but to the world, he projected menace and chaos. That morning, Trevor was running late. He was supposed to meet 2 of his associates at a run-down bar on the other side of town. They had an illicit scheme going something about selling stolen bike parts, and Trevor's temper was already running hot when he woke up with a pounding hangover. The last thing he needed was traffic or any sort of delay. So when he saw an elderly man at the bus stop, he paid him no attention until the old man's army cap reminded him of something. A swirl of half-formed resentments boiled up in Trevor's mind. Maybe it was anger at authority figures. Maybe it was his father who used to be a military man and left him behind. Maybe it was racism, or perhaps it was just the desire to feel powerful over someone who appeared weak. Either way, Trevor gunned the throttle, swerving perilously close to the bus stop, nearly spraying Samuel with debris. He expected the old man to flinch or leap out of the way. Instead, Samuel calmly took a single step back, his hands steady at his sides. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and in that silent look, Trevor saw no fear. He felt challenged by the unimpressed gaze of an old man. So he braked hard, the motorcycle tires screeching on the pavement. With one fluid motion, Trevor hopped off the bike, stomping toward Samuel. The harsh summer sun glinted off the steel buckle on Trevor's leather jacket. In the background, you could hear a few cars rushing by, but nobody seemed to notice or care. A mocking grin twisted across Trevor's face as he confronted Samuel. "You think you're tough, old man?" Trevor growled. Samuel stared back, his voice composed. "Son, you don't want to do this. There's no need for it." The calm in Samuel's voice only enraged Trevor more. Fueled by adrenaline and twisted pride, Trevor raised both hands and shoved the old man square in the chest. Samuel stumbled backward, arms flailing, before he landed hard on the rough asphalt. The crack of his body hitting the ground felt like a thunderclap in the humid air. "I want to do whatever I feel like," Trevor hissed. He spat on the ground near Samuel's foot, adding cruel insult. "Next time, move out of the way." Trevor hopped back on his bike, revving the engine. The pure hatred and contempt in his eyes lingered, as if he was waiting for the old man to say or do something, anything, to justify more violence. But Samuel remained silent, catching his breath, his eyes dark with pain and disappointment. After what felt like an eternity, Trevor tore off down the road, leaving Samuel lying there winded and bruised. For a moment it seemed like no one would even stop to help him, but a passing driver in a beat-up Chevy truck finally pulled over and ran to Samuel's side. The driver was a local farmer named Todd Jenkins, who recognized Samuel from the local church. With gentle hands, Todd helped Samuel to his feet. Blood was trickling from a small cut on his forehead. Samuel touched it, wincing at the sting. "You all right, Mr. Jefferson?" Todd asked, worry etched on his brow. "I'll be fine, Todd," Samuel replied, forcing a tight smile. "Just need a minute." But he wasn't fine. Not at all. He could feel an old wound in his hip screaming with pain. More than that, he was reeling from the brazen disrespect. He had witnessed ugliness in the World War, violence, racism. But there was something particularly jarring about being attacked in broad daylight in his own hometown. He'd spent his life serving his country, shedding blood for the flag. And this was the thanks he got. Todd insisted on driving Samuel to the clinic. Samuel agreed, albeit reluctantly. As Todd helped him into the passenger seat, Samuel stared down the road where the biker had vanished in a plume of dust. He whispered under his breath, "You'll answer for that, one way or another." And he had no idea how right he was. Samuel refused to go to the emergency room, claiming the wait times were too long and that what he needed more was a bit of rest and some ice packs. At the veterans clinic, a nurse named Carla quickly patched up his forehead. Cut scolded him for not taking better care of himself and offered to call his family. Samuel sighed and allowed her to ring his granddaughter Aisha. Aisha Jefferson was a bright, strong-willed woman in her early 30s, working as a probation officer in town. Like her grandfather, she valued discipline and fairness, but she had a fierce protective streak. Hearing what had happened set her blood boiling. "I'm coming right now, Grandpa," she said over the phone, already grabbing her car keys. "You just wait for me." Samuel had no intention of letting the incident become a family crisis, but he was too exhausted to argue. He sat in the small waiting room with a bag of ice pressed to his swollen hip. Outside, the Carolina sun blazed down, and the crisp air conditioning inside the clinic felt jarring against his skin. He closed his eyes, remembering days long gone, days of advanced training, carrying gear through scorching jungles or huddling in foxholes during torrential rainstorms. He thought about the men he'd served with, men who had become brothers. So many had passed away or moved on, but a few were still alive, scattered across the country. In that quiet moment, a peculiar thought stirred in Samuel's mind. What would my old unit do if they heard about this? His unit had been known informally as the Iron Serpents, a name they gave themselves during clandestine operations in Vietnam. They had a reputation for swift, precise action, anything from rescue ops to infiltration missions. They were never officially recognized as a separate group by the military, but the men in that circle carried the memory of those missions with pride. Could they help now? Could that old brotherhood serve to defend him against a younger man's reckless hate? But he immediately dismissed the notion as foolish. He was 85. The last thing he wanted to do was drag old men out of retirement for a petty scuffle. Besides, they weren't all in special operations anymore. Some of them might have health issues or responsibilities. No, that was not the way. Aisha arrived nearly bursting through the clinic doors. She was a tall woman with short, curly hair and the same penetrating gaze as Samuel. Her voice trembled with concern. "Grandpa, what happened? Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm okay, child," he replied, mustering a smile. "Just an unfortunate encounter with someone who doesn't have any respect. Someone who's going to pay for this," she hissed. Her protective anger was palpable, but Samuel grabbed her hand, steadying her. "No need for revenge. Just want him to learn respect." Aisha frowned, tears threatening to spill. "But Grandpa, you can't let this go. The police need to know." "That was assault." Samuel nodded. "I know. But let's see how this plays out. For now, let's just go home." Aisha wanted to protest, but she honored her grandfather's wishes. They made a brief statement at the clinic for their records, and Todd Jenkins, the farmer who witnessed the attack, also gave a quick account. Then Aisha drove Samuel to the modest little house he'd lived in for decades, a place filled with memories, from photos of his late wife to the medals tucked away in boxes. As soon as Samuel's head hit his favorite rocking chair, a single tear escaped his eye. In that salty drop were decades of heartbreak, sacrifice, and simple desire for peace. He told himself he'd let it go, but sometimes the world has different plans. What neither Samuel nor Aisha realized at that moment was that their story had already left that bus stop. In a twist of fate, Todd Jenkins had a son, Kyle Jenkins, who was currently serving with the Army Special Forces at Fort Bragg, just miles away. Kyle had been raised on the stories of local heroes like Samuel Jefferson. He even remembered meeting Samuel as a child, mesmerized by the old man's tales of perseverance. So when Todd called Kyle, ranting about how some scum biker had shoved Samuel Jefferson to the ground, Kyle felt anger flare inside him like a brush fire in the dead of summer. Kyle was a quiet professional. He had been deployed multiple times, had seen intense combat, and was part of a tight-knit unit that valued each other like family. Soldiers in special operations by necessity learn to handle problems swiftly. Kyle knew exactly how quickly bad situations could escalate, especially with a man as unstable as the biker seemed to be. He dialed a few phone numbers, calling on men he trusted. Men who recognized the name Samuel Jefferson from local gatherings. Men who hated bullies. One of Kyle's closest friends was Staff Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, a robust man with a gentle heart and lethal skill set. Another was Sergeant First Class Dan Forrester, whose quick wit was matched only by his dead-shot accuracy. Then there was Sergeant Tiffany Tiff Rivers, one of the few women in their unit. She was known for both her fierce loyalty and her unstoppable drive. Each one, upon hearing the story, felt the same burning desire to do something, and so in less than an hour from Samuel's assault word, had spread throughout a small corner of Fort Bragg's Special Forces community. But this wasn't about some official mission. They weren't about to mobilize the entire army for an old man's bruises. Yet they were men and women with a code respect: the elderly protect, the innocent never abandon those who came before you. Calls were made. People hopped in vehicles, scouring the roads. Some traced Trevor Reed's usual haunts. Others checked local bars. They found out Trevor hung out at a particular dive called the Devil's Pit, a no-name joint near the industrial park. And so the plan started to form. In the simplest of terms, they wanted to find Trevor and persuade him never again to lay a hand on an elderly veteran, especially one as revered as Samuel Jefferson. A few within the group joked about going commando on him, but cooler heads prevailed. They'd approach him, demand an apology, and maybe give him a scare if he refused. But as with most things in life, real events rarely follow a neat script. While this quiet mobilization was happening, Trevor Reed was still roaring around town on his bike, bragging to his buddies about how he put that old dog in his place. His bravado was at an all-time high, and he had no idea that men and women far more dangerous than him were now on his trail. Fate was weaving a dangerous tapestry, and none of the players involved had any clue just how tangled it would get. As Samuel dozed in his rocking chair, Aisha paced the living room phone in hand. She had already called the local police station, filing a report about the assault. The officer on the other end had sounded bored, simply promising to look into it. The conversation left Aisha furious. She knew that bigger crimes happened every day, but surely an unprovoked assault on an 85-year-old war veteran deserved more urgency. Desperate for a solution, Aisha scrolled through her contacts, pausing at the name Michael Harrington. Michael was a detective in the local police department and one of the few law enforcement officials she genuinely trusted. They'd crossed paths professionally. Her probationers often ended up on his radar when they violated parole. She dialed his number. "Harrington," he answered in a clipped tone. "It's Aisha Jefferson. My grandfather was attacked this morning by a biker. I need your help." Michael's voice softened. "Samuel Jefferson. Are you serious? Who in their right mind would do that?" "Some biker named Trevor Reed," Aisha replied, reading the name off a note Todd Jenkins had given her. "He's tall, white, covered in tattoos." Michael sighed. "Trevor Reed? Yeah, we've had run-ins with him. Trouble magnet, that one. Listen, we'll put out a call to pick him up for questioning. But you know how it goes if we don't catch him in the act. It might be complicated." Aisha's knuckles tightened around the phone. "Please just do your best." "I will," Michael promised. "And Aisha, tell your grandpa to hang in there. We owe him a debt we can never repay." Aisha ended the call feeling slightly better. Detective Harrington had some pull in the department. If Trevor made even one slip, they'd pick him up. But what if Trevor disappeared first? She shook off the thought. One way or another, Trevor Reed would face consequences. She would see to it. After that, Aisha spent the next 20 minutes fussing over her grandfather. She brewed him herbal tea, made him a light lunch, and even helped him wash the cut on his forehead more thoroughly. Samuel insisted he could manage on his own, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Grandpa, you've always been my rock," Aisha whispered, more tears threatening to spill. "It kills me to see you hurt like this." Samuel gently squeezed her hand. "I know, child, but you can't let anger control you. It's a poison." She nodded, though her eyes still shone with fierce determination. "I understand." Yet inside, she burned with the need to see Trevor pay. It was late afternoon when Kyle Jenkins and his small band of fellow soldiers finally tracked Trevor Reed's location down. After making discreet inquiries at various gas stations, convenience stores, and among local bikers who weren't fond of Trevor either, they discovered he'd been seen entering a notorious bar called the Devil's Pit. The place had no windows, just a steel door, and a faint red neon sign that spelled out "Open" in flickering letters. It sat next to a row of warehouses, a haven for the roughest crowd in the area. The 4 men and women who formed Kyle's impromptu team were still dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, baseball caps. They parked their vehicles a short distance away, wanting to avoid drawing too much attention. Kyle Carlos. Dan and Tiff had worked together enough times that they fell into a natural formation, scanning their surroundings. A row of battered motorcycles were angled along the curb, the chrome reflecting the last rays of the sinking sun. Amid them was a black Harley with intricate skull designs on the tank, likely Trevor's ride. "This the place?" Tiff asked, narrowing her eyes. Kyle nodded. "Gotta be. You guys sure you want to go in there?" Carlos chuckled. "I've been in rougher places." Dan cracked a grin. "And we've done rougher things in nicer places." They approached the door, the low throb of heavy metal music leaking from inside. Kyle led the way. He wasn't exactly sure how they would handle the confrontation, but they all agreed on one thing: no lethal force, unless absolutely necessary. They were here to send a message, not to start a war. Inside the bar smelled like cheap beer and stale cigarettes. A haze of smoke lingered near the ceiling, and a few mismatched tables dotted the small, dimly lit room. The bartender, an older woman with leathery skin, barely looked up as they entered. In one corner, a small group of bikers was laughing uproariously. Among them was Trevor Reed, nursing a bottle of beer. He looked up when the newcomers stepped in, suspicion flickering in his bloodshot eyes. Kyle and the others stepped closer, and Trevor's biker friends immediately went quiet. Tension thickened, as if everyone sensed a storm about to break. Trevor scowled. "Who the hell are you?" Kyle spoke in a level voice. "That doesn't matter. I heard you shoved an elderly veteran this morning. Samuel Jefferson. We're here on his behalf." A hush fell over the bar. Trevor's eyes flickered with realization, followed by a mocking grin. "Yeah, I shoved that old man. He had it coming, wearing that stupid army hat, like he owned the place." Carlos stiffened, fists curling. Tiff took a slow, calculated step forward, scanning the positions of Trevor's 2 biker buddies. Dan's eyes narrowed, but Kyle kept his composure. He needed to keep this from getting out of hand. "We're here to ask you to apologize," Kyle said firmly. "To admit you were wrong. Then we can all walk away." Trevor let out a bark of laughter that echoed off the grimy walls. "Apologize? To that old fossil? You gotta be kidding me." That was the moment Kyle realized Trevor was beyond reason. He glanced at his friends, and they all shared the same silent message. This is going to get ugly. Trevor's two biker friends, both heavily tattooed, stood up, ready to fight. One was a short but muscular man, with a shaved head and a chain belt. The other was tall, with a scraggly beard, and wearing a denim vest covered in patches. "Listen, soldier boy," the short one sneered. "Why don't you crawl back to base before we teach you a lesson?" It happened fast. Trevor took a swing at Kyle. Kyle sidestepped, letting Trevor's fist sail past. In the same motion, Dan lunged at the short biker, delivering a perfectly timed palm strike to the chest. The short biker stumbled back, crashing into a table. Bearded biker tried to tackle Tiff, but she pivoted, hooking his arm and flipping him over her hip in a fluid motion that ended with him smacking into the sticky floor. Trevor recovered his balance, adrenaline surging. He dashed to the bar, yanking a broken pool cue from a nearby table. "You'll regret stepping in here," he spat. Carlos advanced, raising his hands non-threateningly, hoping to talk Trevor down. But Trevor swung the pool cue in a wide arc. Carlos blocked it with a forearm. Pain flared, but his years of training told him to ignore it. He twisted, ripping the cue from Trevor's grip, then snapped it in half like it was a twig. Trevor's eyes widened, though his bravado held. All around them, a few more patrons jumped to their feet, sensing a brawl. The bartender screamed, "Enough," but nobody listened. The tension was about to detonate. Kyle gave Trevor one last chance. "You shove an 85-year-old veteran and brag about it like it's a trophy. That man served our country. People around here respect him. You'd better back down right now before this gets worse." Trevor clenched his fists, eyes flicking between the four formidable individuals. He was outnumbered and outclassed, but in typical Trevor fashion, he pushed his luck. "Get out, or else." Realizing words were wasted, Kyle lunged. In a flurry of precise moves, he delivered a series of strikes that left Trevor wheezing. The wind knocked out of him. When Trevor swung back, he found only air. Kyle then swept Trevor's legs out from under him, sending the biker crashing to the floor. Silence strangled the bar for a moment. Trevor lay flat on his back, blinking in shock. If the confrontation had continued another second, it might have escalated to something far worse. But the four soldiers had accomplished what they'd come for. They taught Trevor Reed that there were consequences for hurting Samuel Jefferson. But just as quickly as the bar settled, a siren wailed outside. The ruckus had drawn the attention of a passing patrol car. The next few moments were a confusing whirlwind of police barging in, shouting, "Hands where we can see them!" Tiff and Dan complied instantly, raising their hands. Kyle and Carlos did the same. Trevor, on the other hand, lay groaning on the floor, cursing in pain. The police, unsure of who started what, lined everyone up against the wall. It took a while for the facts to be sorted out. In the end, Trevor, his buddies, and a couple of rowdy patrons were taken into custody for questioning. The four soldiers had to explain their side of the story. Detective Michael Harrington eventually arrived, recognized Kyle Jenkins, and listened carefully. After a tense negotiation, the soldiers were released, though sternly warned about vigilantism. Trevor glared at them from the back of a squad car, hate burning in his eyes. He spat one last threat. "You made a big mistake, mark my words, this ain't over." But as the patrol car door slammed shut, Kyle and the others exchanged relieved looks. They had done their best to deliver a message. Whether it would stick, only time would tell. The police took Trevor to the station. Detective Harrington personally led the questioning, detailing the assault on Samuel Jefferson. He laid out the potential charges, including assault on a senior citizen, no trivial matter. But Trevor, still high on anger and indignation, insisted he would never apologize. He refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Trevor was held overnight, only released the next morning on bail, posted by some of his biker associates. The moment he tasted freedom, his hatred for Samuel and for the soldiers who had humiliated him metastasized into something darker. Meanwhile, word spread through the local community about how a group of service members had stood up for an elderly war hero. Many folks expressed gratitude, some even calling them local heroes. But there were those who warned that the confrontation might spark more violence, especially from Trevor Reed's associates, who despised the military and reveled in chaos. The tension began to simmer like a pot about to boil over. Samuel Jefferson, for his part, was overwhelmed. He never asked for any of this. When he heard from Todd Jenkins that Kyle and others had confronted Trevor, he felt torn. A part of him was deeply touched that people would defend his honor, but another part worried about more bloodshed. From his rocking chair, Samuel reflected, "I didn't survive 2 wars to see my hometown turn into a battlefield." He resolved to speak to Kyle and try to calm the situation. But fate had more complications in store. The Carolina summer had always been relentless, but that night the heat seemed to hang heavier than usual, cloying, almost unnatural. It was the kind of evening that made the shadows feel alive, where silence carried a charge, and where even the breeze seemed to whisper warnings. At exactly 2:47 a.m., a soft orange glow began to flicker in the distance along Riley Road, not far from the gates of Fort Bragg. Within moments, that flicker became a blaze. Fire devoured the outer walls of the VFW Post 6 and 70, swallowing American flags and charred photographs, consuming decades of memories in a matter of minutes. The VFW, short for Veterans of Foreign Wars, was more than a building. It was a sanctuary, a gathering place for those who had served a place for storytelling, healing laughter, and community. Veterans met there weekly to share meals, host charity events, warn their fallen, and remind one another that their sacrifices hadn't been forgotten. That sacred place was now an inferno. By the time the first fire trucks arrived, half the structure was gone. Flames danced wildly through broken rafters, casting eerie silhouettes against the night sky. The air was thick with the acrid stench of smoke-scorched wood and something deeper, something personal. The firefighters worked frantically, shouting commands, hauling hoses, and hacking down weakened supports. But the damage was already done. Among the observers, a few veterans had gathered still in pajamas or half-dressed, having heard the sirens from nearby neighborhoods. One man wept openly. Another simply stared into the flames, jaw clenched and fists tight, the red glow flickering in his misty eyes. They all knew this was no accident. A few hours later, once the fire was extinguished and investigators began combing the scene, a firefighter discovered what they all feared, a charred gasoline canister near the back entrance and a trail of rags soaked in accelerant. Arson. Deliberate. Calculated. Cold. By 6 a.m., the local news outlets had already caught wind of the story. Drones flew overhead, capturing footage of the still smoldering ruins. Reporters flocked to the chain-link fence, now cordoning off the site, interviewing teary-eyed veterans and confused neighbors. One interview stood out. A Vietnam vet named Walter Crenshaw, age 74, stood in front of the camera with soot smudged on his face and tears streaking down his cheeks. "They didn't just burn a building," he said. voice shaking. They burned our history, our refuge. Whoever did this wasn't just vandalism. It was hate. Plain and simple. By mid-morning, the whispers had begun. People started connecting the dots: the recent assault on Samuel Jefferson, the confrontation at the bar, the angry biker crowd led by Trevor Reed. There was no concrete evidence, but the timing was too precise, too poetic in its cruelty to be coincidental. At Fort Bragg, Kyle Jenkins watched the footage on his phone during a morning workout. The video of the burned-out VFW had been shared in the base group chats, and within moments of watching it, Kyle's pulse was racing not from exertion, but from fury. He slammed the phone down on the weight bench and muttered a curse under his breath. Carlos Mendoza walked over, towel around his neck. "You saw it." Kyle nodded grimly. "The VFW, torched last night." Carlos narrowed his eyes. "Trevor." "No doubt in my mind," Kyle growled. "We embarrassed him. He's trying to send a message." By 10 a.m., Kyle was on the phone with Tiff and Dan. They didn't need to be convinced. Each one of them had shared meals at that VFW post. They knew the stories, knew the men and women who leaned on that place for comfort. For some, it was the only place they felt understood. "This wasn't just a fire," Tiff said coldly. "It was war." But even with their fury boiling, they knew better than to charge in recklessly. The bar incident had already drawn heat from both military command and local law enforcement. Another act of confrontation without evidence could cost them their careers or worse. "Without proof, we can't touch him," Dan said, pacing his small kitchen while still in uniform. "He'll lawyer up and spin it like a coincidence." Kyle let out a frustrated sigh. "We need to be smart. But I swear to God, if I see him with a lighter in his hand." They agreed to regroup and keep eyes on the situation, but they weren't the only ones watching. At home, Samuel Jefferson sat in his rocking chair, a cool cloth draped over his forehead. Aisha had been up early making him tea, her face tight with worry. When she saw the footage on TV, she gasped, then ran to her grandfather. "They burned it down, Grandpa. The VFW. It's gone." Samuel closed his eyes, slowly pressing his lips into a tight line. "The one on Riley Road." "Yes, last night. The fire marshal says it was arson." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out and gently squeezed Aisha's hand. There was a storm behind his gaze now, quiet, controlled, but unmistakably powerful. "I helped build that place," he said softly. "With my own hands, back in '82. Painted the hall myself, planted the flagpole with Walter and Ray. Now it's ash." Aisha nodded, her voice trembling. "They think it was Trevor, or his crew." Samuel didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, watching as sunlight filtered through the trees and spilled across the floor in golden streaks. A morning that should have felt peaceful now hung with unease. "I feared it might come to this," he finally said. "You mean retaliation?" "No," Samuel said. "Escalation." He rose from his chair, slowly, carefully, his old bones protesting every motion. He walked to a cabinet, opened it, and pulled out an old box, a wooden case with brass hinges. Inside were mementos, photos, medals, and a folded American flag. He pulled out a worn photograph, 3 men in uniform standing side by side in the jungles of Vietnam. One of them was Samuel. The other 2 were long gone. "I didn't survive 2 wars to watch my hometown turn into a battlefield," he said. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us, our community, our values. Aisha placed a hand on his shoulder. So what do we do? Samuel turned to her. We stop this before it gets worse. I need to speak to him. Trevor Grandpa. No. That's dangerous, I know, he said. But if we keep playing defense, he'll just push further. I need to look him in the eye, man to man. I need to show him what real strength looks like. Not fists, not fire, but conviction. Aisha was visibly shaken. Then I'm coming with you. You'll drive me? Samuel agreed. But stay in the car. Please. She wanted to argue, but saw the look in his eyes. That same look he had the night she graduated from the academy. The look of a man who had walked through fire and come out stronger. Fine, she said quietly. But if I see him lift a finger toward you. I trust you, he said. That afternoon, Samuel made a few phone calls to old friends, old brothers in arms. He didn't ask for help. He simply told them what was happening. Some asked if they should come. He didn't say yes or no. He simply told the truth. Across town, Trevor Reed was riding high. Literally. He was lounging in a grimy garage behind a bar, sipping beer, and gloating to his friends about how he gave those military boys something to cry about. I told you, he bragged, you don't mess with venom. You touch me, I burn what you love. His friends laughed, some nervously, others too far gone on whiskey to care. But beneath his bravado, Trevor was twitchy, paranoid. Every car engine outside made him glance over his shoulder. Every creak of the floorboards made his hand inch toward the knife strapped to his boot. He hadn't expected the VFW blaze to get so much attention, and he certainly hadn't expected the community's response. The backlash was growing. Even some of his biker buddies were uneasy. Maybe you went too far, one of them muttered. Trevor didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the wall where a news anchor was replaying footage of the burning VFW. In the background, a man's silhouette stood near the flames. Old, proud, wounded. Samuel Jefferson. Trevor's lip curled into a sneer. Old man wants a war fine. Let's give him one. But he had no idea that Samuel wasn't coming for war. He was coming for peace. And behind him, a quiet army was beginning to stir. The summer sun had just begun its descent behind the tree line, casting long golden shadows across the cracked pavement of the defunct shopping center on the edge of town. Once bustling with mom-and-pop stores and weekend shoppers, the place now stood like a graveyard of forgotten commerce, empty storefronts, broken windows, rusting signage, and weeds curling through the concrete like fingers reaching up from beneath. The wind whistled low through the broken roof tiles, carrying the scent of dust motor oil and tension. Samuel Jefferson stood at the edge of the lot, leaning gently on his cane. He wore a clean button-down shirt tucked into his pressed slacks, and his army cap sat square on his head. Despite the pain radiating from his injured hip and the dull throb in his lower back, he held himself upright with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen worse things than cracked sidewalks and angry bikers. His eyes, steady and alert, scanned the horizon as he waited. Inside a beat-up blue Toyota parked nearby, Aisha Jefferson gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Her lips were pressed into a tight line and her heart hammered in her chest. She watched her grandfather from behind the windshield, unsure whether she was more furious with Trevor Reed for agreeing to this meeting, or with her grandfather for insisting on going alone. She had tried to talk him out of it, pleaded with him even, but Samuel was unshakable in his conviction. "This ends today," he had said. "No more blood, no more fear. I need to try." Now Aisha could do nothing but watch and pray. The windows of the Toyota were rolled up, but her phone was open and recording just in case. The detective she trusted, Michael Harrington, was on standby, but Samuel had insisted the first approach must come from him alone. A low rumble grew in the distance, and Aisha's breath caught in her throat. They were coming. A convoy of motorcycles thundered down the desolate street, led by Trevor Reed on his jet-black Harley, the skull on the tank glinting in the dying sunlight. 3 more bikers followed, hulking men in denim and leather, their faces partially obscured by bandanas and sunglasses. The sound was deafening, like the growl of distant thunder announcing an incoming storm. The motorcycles came to a slow, synchronized halt 20 feet from Samuel. The engines idled for a moment before Trevor killed his and dismounted with a dramatic swing of his leg. He approached alone at first, his steps cocky, almost theatrical, like a predator sizing up its prey. The other 3 bikers remained beside their bikes, arms folded, eyes scanning the area for signs of a trap. "Well, well," Trevor sneered, stopping a few feet from Samuel. "Didn't think you had it in you to call me out. You looking for round 2, old man?" Samuel didn't flinch. He stood there, calm as still water. "I'm here to end this, Trevor, not escalate it." Trevor scoffed. "End it. What makes you think you're in any position to end anything?" "You and your boys have stirred up enough hate," Samuel said. His voice was low, controlled, but firm. "People are scared. Veterans are looking over their shoulders. That VFW fire. That's not protest, son. That's cowardice. That's terrorism." Trevor's smile twisted. "You got any proof I had anything to do with that? Because unless you're here with a badge and a warrant, all I hear is a bunch of whining from a relic." Samuel took a single step forward, leaning more heavily on his cane. "I'm not a cop, and I'm not looking to throw you in jail, not yet. I came because I believe even men like you, broken and angry as you are, can be reached." Trevor blinked clearly, thrown off by the remark. For a fraction of a second his bravado faltered, but then he laughed bitterly. "You think I care what you believe? I don't need a sermon. You got no idea what it's like living in this world now. People like me, we're just trying to survive. You think your wars make you better than us?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "My wars, I don't boast about them. I carry them. Every day. In my bones. In my memories. I fought so others wouldn't have to. So kids like you could build something better, not tear it down." Trevor stepped in closer, his face inches from Samuel's now. "Save it. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a dusty old man playing dress-up with your war stories. You should have stayed home that day. You got in my way." At that, he reached out and grabbed Samuel's cane, yanking it roughly from the old man's hands. The sudden loss of balance made Samuel stagger, but he remained upright. Aisha screamed inside the car and reached for the door handle. But Samuel, even without looking back, raised one hand slightly, a subtle signal. "Stand down." Trevor brandished the cane like a trophy. "You gonna give another speech now? Or are we done here?" Samuel breathed deeply. "I came here with peace in my heart, Trevor. But if you hit me with that, just know I won't be the one you'll have to answer to." Trevor's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "Old man." Before Samuel could reply, one of Trevor's cronies, a bulky man with brass knuckles and a snake tattoo that ran up his neck, stepped off his bike and began circling behind Samuel. His boots scraped ominously against the pavement. Another biker adjusted something in his jacket, and Aisha's nerves frayed to the brink. And then headlights. 3 pairs of them. Engines roared onto the lot from the east side entrance, and the sudden screech of tires shattered the tension like a thunderclap. 3 SUVs and 2 sedans formed a half-circle around the bikers, like a tactical blockade. Doors flew open. Out stepped Kyle Jenkins, Carlos Mendoza Dan Forrester, and Tiffany Tiff Rivers, all dressed in civilian clothes, but moving with unmistakable military precision. Behind them came uniformed officers from the Fayetteville Police Department. Leading them calm but commanding was Detective Harrington. "Hands where we can see them." One officer shouted. Trevor spun around, startled, his mouth curling into a furious snarl. "You set me up!" he shouted at Samuel. Samuel took a shaky breath and shook his head. "I gave you a choice. You made yours." Trevor's cronies tensed. One reached for something under his jacket, but Tiff was already moving, stepping in with the grace and speed of a panther. "Don't even think about it," she barked. Police officers drew their weapons, and the chaos nearly ignited until one of the older bikers raised his hands, then another. Slowly they surrendered, realizing they were outmatched and outgunned. Trevor remained the last to comply. He turned toward Samuel one final time, cane still in his grasp, his knuckles white with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You people think you've won, but you don't know what's coming." Detective Harrington moved forward slowly and deliberately. "Trevor Reed, you're under arrest. You're being charged with assault harassment and suspicion of arson. You'll get your day in court. But this is over." The moment the handcuffs clicked around Trevor's wrists, something seemed to drain out of him. Not regret. No, that wasn't in his nature, but defeat. Or the first taste of it, at least. He was led to a squad car. Samuel watched his shoulders sagging now, not from fear, but exhaustion. The confrontation had taken more out of him than he expected. Aisha rushed from the car, finally unable to stay seated any longer, and wrapped her arms around her grandfather. "I told you not to come alone," she whispered. Samuel gave her a weary smile. "I knew I wasn't alone." Across the lot, dozens of people had begun to gather. Veterans from across the community, having quietly followed the plan, had shown up out of loyalty and pride. Some wore faded military gear, others T-shirts bearing their unit crests. They formed a silent semicircle behind Samuel, a wall of support, unity, and resolve. Kyle Jenkins approached, saluting softly. "Mr. Jefferson, we were never going to let anything happen to you." Samuel nodded. "Thank you. But this was never just about me." He looked across the gathering crowd. "It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when you're tired. Hate feeds on fear. And today we didn't let it win." Detective Harrington added, "We've got enough evidence now. The arson, the threats, it all ties back to Trevor. He won't be a problem anymore." But Samuel didn't smile. He looked past Harrington to the empty storefronts, the wind still howling through broken glass, the scars of a community that had endured too much ugliness. This was a battle, he said, but the war for decency, that's never really over. The group stood in solemn silence for a moment. Then someone began to clap. Slow, respectful applause. It spread among the officers, the veterans, even a few bystanders who had wandered over from the neighboring streets. It wasn't a cheer of victory. It was a tribute to Samuel Jefferson, to resolve, to standing tall even when the world tries to knock you down. Trevor Reed was gone, at least for now. But the story of what happened in that forgotten parking lot would ripple across the town and far beyond for years to come. Trevor's arrest led to a cascade of legal troubles. Multiple witnesses came forward to tie him to the string of harassments. The police found evidence linking him to the VFW arson. He was looking at serious prison time. Meanwhile, some of his biker associates disavowed him, saying he was too volatile, a dangerous liability. Trevor's reign of terror had ended, brought down by an unlikely alliance of Special Forces soldiers, local law enforcement, and the quiet dignity of an 85-year-old veteran. In the weeks that followed, the community slowly healed. Volunteers poured in to help rebuild the VFW post with fundraising events led by local businesses. Kyle Jenkins and his soldier friends were commended by their commanding officers for their courage under pressure, though they were also given a lecture on the legal ramifications of vigilante actions. Detective Harrington's stock rose in the department, praised for his successful crackdown on Trevor's criminal ring. And Samuel Jefferson. He returned to his daily routine, volunteering at Womack Army Medical Center, helping younger veterans navigate their mental and physical challenges. Aisha fussed over him more than ever, though he insisted he was fine. Despite his bruises and lingering aches, Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude. It wasn't about victory or vengeance. It was about reminding the world that age is not weakness, and that respect for those who served is a bond that cuts across generations. Yet the story didn't end in simple triumph. Hate never disappears entirely. Trevor's sentencing came months later. In the courtroom, as the judge declared a stiff prison sentence, Trevor finally glanced over at Samuel. For the briefest second, a flicker of regret seemed to cross his face, but it was drowned by the same old resentment. As he was led away, Trevor muttered curses under his breath, condemning everyone who had stood against him. Samuel watched with a heavy heart. Aisha stood beside him, tears in her eyes. "He'll never change, will he?" she asked quietly. Samuel sighed. "It's not our job to decide that. We did what we had to do to protect our community." He set a hand gently on her shoulder. "Sometimes, child, that's all you can do." 6 months later, the VFW Post 270 reopened with a grand ceremony. Veterans from across the region attended. Tables were laden with home-cooked meals donated by church groups and volunteers. Patriotic banners hung from the rafters. A short memorial was held for those who had passed during the rebuilding effort, a reminder that time stops for no one. Samuel was there, wearing a fresh army cap, his best collared shirt, and a humble smile. The crowd parted for him wherever he walked. Men and women saluted him, thanked him for his service, or simply offered a handshake. The sense of gratitude in the room was palpable. Kyle Jenkins and his team arrived, each wearing pressed civilian attire. They greeted Samuel warmly, exchanging stories and laughter. Detective Harrington was also present, giving a short speech on community unity and the power of standing together against hate. Aisha clung to her grandfather's arm, proudly, eyes shining with admiration. At one point, a local reporter approached Samuel for a brief interview. "Mr. Jefferson," she asked, "how do you feel now seeing this place rebuilt after everything that happened?" Samuel paused, gazing at the refurbished walls and the laughter of old friends. "I feel blessed," he said. "Blessed that this community chooses hope over fear, that we protect each other, and that we don't back down from doing the right thing." The reporter smiled. "Do you have a final message for anyone listening tonight?" He glanced around, thinking of the countless men and women who serve of the younger generations, who sometimes forget the sacrifices made by those who came before. Respect, Samuel said simply. Respect for each other, for service, for life. If we held on to that, everything else would fall into place. The crowd applauded, gently moved by his words. And in that moment, the memory of Trevor Reed and his hateful shove was overshadowed by the enduring spirit of unity. The war had lasted only a few weeks, yet the lessons would live on for generations. The story you've just heard is a testament to the unbreakable spirit of community, loyalty, and respect. Through Samuel Jefferson's trials, we witness the power of standing together against hatred and the profound impact it can have when good people refuse to remain silent. It reminds us that true strength is not found in youth or brute force, but in courage, compassion, and the bonds we share with one another. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends, family, or anyone who needs a reminder that decency still matters in this world. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt, inspiring stories. Every share and subscription helps keep stories like Samuel's alive, continuing the fight against injustice, one word at a time. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay kind, and stand up for what's right.